All right, so cognitive therapy, the main goal is cognitive restructuring. And this might be one of my favorite pictures from slides in this class. What a great picture for cognitive restructuring. The main goal in cognitive therapy, so if you remember with George Kelly, he's talking about the therapist helping the client to build more reality matching personal constructs to replace faulty ones, right? And with Albert Ellis, he's talking about the psychologist helping the client to build more rational beliefs. So cognitive restructuring, changing thought processes. I want you to think about that for a moment, because now we're talking about something pretty abstract. In other words, when we talked about behavioral kinds of ideas and therapies, we're talking about behaviors that we can see. We can witness them, right? We can record them, we can measure them. What about inside somebody's head, right? How, we're going to look at some great techniques for restructuring someone's thoughts. But how effective do you think that is? Okay? And the idea here is that this is an abstract construct. And so cognitive therapy works the very best with people who are really good at abstract thinking, who have high abstract thinking scores. And, as we talked about, no therapist is perfect for every client, but cognitive therapy in particular, very good for somebody who's got some skill in thinking in a more abstract way, that their score is average or higher. Oftentimes what we see are behavioral therapies and cognitive therapies combined, right? Particularly strong combination. But let's think about this abstract thinking. And this brings us now to questionnaire number 11. And in the title slot, you can put abstract versus concrete thinking. This is what you measured yourself on. And you can interpret this in the context of ASU student data. Okay. All right, so you've got an X score and a Y score, and what you're looking for is which one is the highest, right? Which one is the highest, X or Y? X is for concrete thinking, okay? That's things you can touch or smell or taste or see or hear, right? And your Y score is for abstract thinking. Things, abstract things like justice or love, okay? More abstract things. They're not concrete. And here you can interpret that it's in context of ASU students. The percentage, so you already know which one is your high score, right? Abstract or concrete. But the percentage of ASU students who have the highest score on concrete is actually only 18%. So just under 20. The percentage who have the highest score in abstract is 71. Okay, and the percentage who are equal on both, so just a couple points off on either one, was about 11%. So if you're only 5 points off on either one, from each other, then you would belong in this middle category of being equal on both. Why do you think it is that we have such a high percentage of when it comes to abstract thinking? And if you guessed because they're college students, you're right. And you think about it, only about 30% of high school students go on to get a higher education degree. And usually people who are good at abstract thinking tend to do so. Okay. And we're going to look at 3 different examples of cognitive therapy. We're going to start out here with Kelly's fixed role therapy. Kelly, so this is George's therapy, right? And a lot of followers today still doing this kind of therapy. And notice that his is two different steps, and it starts with something that is called the rep test. Okay, the rep test. And the idea here is the very first thing that you need to do when you're doing George Kelly's kind of therapy with your client is you need to identify their faulty personal constructs. It might be one, it might be more than one, but you need to identify them before you can start working to change them. Okay, and that is what the rep test is for. And we don't, the actual test is very cool. It is very different from the types of skills that you've been taking. But it's beyond the scope of this class to really go into it. So if you're interested in that, though, you can look it up online. You can look at Kelly's rep test, or you can even go into the Psych Info database and look for Kelly's rep test. But it really is a very cool test that helps the client and the therapist together to identify the client's faulty constructs. Okay? Now, once you've identified those, the second step is called the moccasin technique. The moccasin technique, what is that? Well, there's a really famous saying that goes like this: you really don't know somebody until what? And some of you might have said, until you walk a mile in their shoes. But that actually originated until you walk a mile in their moccasins. Okay, and that's why this is called the moccasin technique, because the second step in George's therapy is role playing. So the therapist and the client create an imaginary person. And this imaginary person, the client helps name this person too. So they have a different first name. And this imaginary person is one who believes the more rational personal construct, the more reality matching one. So let's say that the client believes that people are generally not trustworthy. And that's what's really been messing things up in their life. And now they really want to turn this around, but how do you turn this around? I mean, do you really have control of your beliefs? Well, Kelly showed a really interesting way that many clients can gain a new personal construct using role play. So let's say that the client's name is Joe and they come up with the name Sam for their imaginary person. And Sam, has a personal construct that he holds and views the world through, which is people are generally trustworthy. Okay? Now, the client's job is to play Sam, and the therapist's job is to play somebody else in very many different situations. So, for instance, a therapist might come up with a situation at work, okay, and particularly one that the client has found challenging, and then the client is playing Sam, somebody who's viewing this and experiencing this as somebody who believes that people are generally trustworthy. Now, you might have guessed that the client might have a tendency to start seeing things as Joe again, especially if they're really doing a good job of role-playing and the therapist is doing a good job of playing the other person, right? In which case, it's the therapist's job to confront them and to pull them back and say, wait, no, you're thinking about this and you're reacting like Joe would. How would Sam think about this? How would Sam react to this? Get it? And certainly the therapist would not stick to just situations at work. Because if, what happens is over time, after enough role play, the client can go out and try this in the real world with real situations. Okay? But if they've only learned it in one context, they're only going to have a chance of succeeding in that context. So the therapist is going to jump between like things at work and things at home, situations at home, and situations with friends, and situations in different hobby situations, situations at school, so on and so forth. Okay? And the idea is they build up to a point where the client can now get homework, to go out and to practice seeing things and experiencing things and reacting to them like Sam would, and come back and report on that. Okay? And particularly powerful. So this really has proved successful for a lot of clients and able to change the way they think, to restructure their thinking. Pretty cool, huh? All right. Now, also we've got Ellis's rational emotive therapy. Ellis's rational emotive therapy is based on that ABC again, right? The activating experience, the irrational belief, and the consequential emotion. So I want to quiz you on this for a moment. According to Ellis, clients come into therapy complaining about what? Okay, so pause this and see if you remember. Okay, and the answer is the consequential emotion. Remember, we looked at the example of depression, right? Okay, so they would complain, for instance, about depression. Now, your next question, the therapist asks them, why are you depressed? Why do you have this consequential emotion, in other words? Okay, and what do they respond with? According to Ellis, they tend to respond with, again, pause the video until you know the answer, or think you know it, and the answer is the activating experience. In our example, it was a divorce many years before. Right? What they don't tend to come up with is the real cause, the immediate cause, which is the irrational belief. In our example, that irrational belief was, nobody is ever going to love me again. Right? So it's a therapist's job to bring out that irrational belief. Okay? To bring it, to discover it, and then to bring it into the client's consciousness so that you can confront the logic in it. So very similar to Kelly's, except now we're focusing on more narrow beliefs. Beliefs usually about the self, or certain other people in the world, or certain relationships. Another example of this is, let's say that somebody comes in for therapy, and they are coming in for therapy because they're really anxious about their marriage. So anxiety would be the consequential emotion. In the activating experience, when you ask them, why are you anxious about your marriage? Why do you think your marriage might be in trouble? They say, because we tend to argue. And after talking to them more, you find out that they tend to hold an irrational belief that they have to, and their spouse need to agree on everything in order to have a good marriage, right? Which really is irrational. And it brings me back to a really interesting memory, because when I have a partner who's all the way across the country, and there was one time in academia, that's not unusual that you need to live apart for a certain number of years, but before you can live together. But we actually met when we were working on the same project, and so for a couple of years we got to live together, and we had a house in the neighborhood, and these years happened to cover a major presidential election, and we actually had two signs in our lawn, two very completely different signs, campaign signs for the presidency, and it really befuddled the neighbors, hey? But we kind of got a kick out of it. But the idea here is to get the client to see the rationality that you guys don't have to agree on everything to have a really good relationship, right? In fact, Ellis would encourage them to see the humor in it. And of course, responding with humor, as long as it's at themselves as a couple, or themselves in particular, and not at their partner, they're laughing with their partner, is certainly a much more functional reaction to happening to disagree on something, okay, than to become upset about it. So that's Ellis's rational emotive therapy, and remember that when he uses confrontation, he has a special technique with that. What is he going to use along with that to try to soften it? And if you guessed, remembered properly from the prior lecture segment? The answer to that is humor, right? Okay. Now, a third example of cognitive therapy is one that can be used with other therapies or by itself. And it's a really popular one, so there are many therapists who kind of came up with this idea and using it even still today. And so you don't have a particular name of this one, but it's called self-instructional training. And the idea here is that we internal monologue all the time. In other words, what we mean by internal monologue is we talk to ourselves all the time. And oftentimes that self-talk, if people are having difficulties in their life and go to see a therapist, the therapist often finds that the self-talk is negative. Okay, so if you have a tendency, for instance, when you stub your toe, let's say on the coffee table in the middle of the living room, to say, I am so stupid, or something like that, okay, where you're attacking yourself. Again, the therapist first can really bring up and help to confront the rationality of that. I mean, you might be a little clumsy, maybe, hey, but what does your intelligence have to do with this, right? This is really negative self-talk. It's not going to help. And once, in Kelly and in Alice's therapy, once those irrational beliefs or faulty self-constructs are identified, okay, you can give clients, help them come up with more positive internal monologues, okay, and give them little exercises to do, and it might be with certain triggers, like before each meal, or every morning when they wake up, and every night before they go to sleep, or it might be a trigger of certain times of the day if they have a structured schedule and they'll be aware of that. But certain triggers to actually say to themselves, they can say it out loud or they can say it in their head, but they can refute that irrational belief, for instance, with a rational one. Like, we have an awesome marriage and it doesn't matter if we don't agree about everything. If you've ever, for instance, seen somebody who's had little stickum notes, these little stickum notes all over the place, they might be on their bathroom mirror, they might be on the refrigerator door, and it might just say something like, I'm an awesome writer, okay? Then they may be working on getting rid of an irrational belief and replacing it with a more rational one about their writing skills in particular. Self-instructional training, internal monologues.